I'd now like to recognize Mr. Babin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. Thank you all for being here as expert witnesses. And we heard a little history a while ago. I had to leave the room for a minute, but I did catch the end of it. Very interesting, because I love history. Are you familiar, Dr. Kopp, with the Norse settlements in Iceland and Greenland, but around the year 1000, and that there was farming and animal husbandry in Greenland for nearly 300 years, which lasted up until about 1300, and then we had what we call the Little Ice Age, which lasted up till about 1700, and then the Greenland colony disappeared. But it's archaeologically sound evidence that has told us that it did last that long. What could have possibly caused the climate to change so much that we would have farming and animal husbandry in Greenland for a period of 2.5, 3 centuries? Could you have blamed that on human emissions, or can you give me an answer to that question?
So there are fluctuations that we see in circulation in the North Atlantic. There's something called the North Atlantic Oscillation that might have had a role to play there. The Little Ice Age, which was then triggered, may have had something to do with volcanic emissions. The details of that are still an area of research. A lot of that is more of a localized phenomena in the North Atlantic. There's some global temperature change, but that global temperature cooling actually starts around 1000 CE.
So we really don't, what you're saying is we don't really know. But in the opinion of everybody sitting at that table up there, was it more advantageous to have a little warming going on around the globe, or was it more advantageous to have a little cooling going around the globe? Because during the Little Ice Age, we lost lots and lots of humans to various causes that were in response and as a direct result of dropping temperatures. Well, how would you answer it?
Well,
I would say that it would be more advantageous to have lived in a climate that was a little bit warmer.
Yeah, so I would say that over that period, we are talking about a very small change in global temperature, roughly 0.3 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's worth keeping that in context when we're talking about the 2 degrees Fahrenheit, so almost 10 times as much that we've seen over the last century.
Anybody else want to answer that?
Yeah, Mr. Babin, I think the way I think about it is not that there is an ideal temperature that we know for certain that human flourishing will be maximal. We don't that science can't really tell us that in a meaningful way. What we do know is we've built our society around the temperatures that we encountered over the last 200, 300 years. And as Dr. Kopp says, we're fixing to change those temperatures quite a bit. And that rapid transition is the cause for concern.
But we do know that when Canada and the upper part of the United States was uninhabitable during the Ice Age, that it certainly wouldn't have been conducive to economic development. I just feel like, there's no question that our climate is changing, no question whatsoever. But to blame and everything on human activity and expect the United States of America, the taxpayers in our country, to pick up the tab to pay carbon taxes and for carbon footprints and lower their quality of life and standard of living and increase the cost of living, while our biggest polluters around the world absolutely go scot-free and continue. So it's hard for me to justify how that we could be expected to pay that kind of a price. And I want to ask one more question, too. Do you support a transparent and full accounting of costs, benefits, and projected impacts to the global climate of individual climate policy proposals? I'm going to ask Dr. Ahey, is that the way you pronounce your name? I'm sorry.
That's fine. It's a difficult name, but thank you for the question.
Okay.
We do need a full accounting, and that does happen under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, at least in terms of emissions. And we know the U.S. alone is responsible for 25% of all emissions. There are efforts to try and understand better how much the cost of those emissions are in terms of impacts on our health, impacts on our ecosystems, our livelihoods, on our economies. And there's growing amount of work looking at what the benefits of action would be. Just from the health sector, we know that the health co-benefits of many mitigation policies are of the same order of magnitude as the cost of mitigation. That if we get more people to ride their bicycles, to walk to work, to change their diets, to have less exposure to particulates, the avoided premature deaths, the avoided hospitalizations are a very large amount of money that would offset the cost of emission reductions. So we do need to look much more broadly at the cost and the benefits, taking into account who bears the cost and who reaps the benefits, and how to make sure that this is done in a way that's as fair as possible.
But if we're responsible for 25% of the emissions, as you say, then why should we pay on nearly 100% of the cost? Because it sounds like that's kind of where that's the direction that you folks would have us go. And I think my time is over and expired.